Greetings, old friends and new visitors of my channel. Today we're diving into the story of one of the most intense and controversial figures in the wizarding world, Bellatrix Lestrange. Myths and misunderstandings swirl around her like a dark fog, but it's time to cut through the noise. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Mad? Not quite. Bellatrix is often portrayed as a crazed, unhinged witch, but the reality is far more chilling. She was completely sane. Her actions weren't the result of madness. They were conscious, calculated decisions. Voldemort kept her close for a reason. She believed in his ideology with every fiber of her being and never hesitated to do whatever it took to bring his vision to life. Given the chance, she would do it all again, without the slightest regret. Number 2, a truly dangerous duelist. Death Eaters are often compared to Star Wars stormtroopers, scary-looking, but largely ineffective. Bellatrix, however, was the terrifying exception. She didn't run at the first sign of trouble. On the contrary, she fought with terrifying skill and unwavering confidence. In the books, in a scene left out of the films, Bellatrix battles Ginny, Hermione, and Luna all at once, and she holds her own impressively. Number 3, she didn't look like she did in the movies. Helena Bonham Carter gave a stunning performance, and her version of Bellatrix was unforgettable, but the book's description paints a very different picture. After 15 years in Azkaban, Bellatrix's once beautiful face had been twisted by starvation, madness, and misery. The proud noblewoman had become a gaunt, hollow-eyed ghost of her former self. That's the real cost of Azkaban. Number 4, Bellatrix had a child. If you only read the original series or saw the films, this might shock you. Bellatrix had a daughter. Not with her husband, Rodolphus Lestrange, but with Lord Voldemort himself. Her name is Delphine, revealed in the play Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. According to some sources, she was born sometime between the 5th and 6th books. Number 5, one of the few female Death Eaters. The Death Eaters were, overwhelmingly, a male-dominated group, at least in the books and films. Bellatrix stood out not just as a woman, but as one of the most fearsome figures in their ranks. The only other named female Death Eater is Alecto Carrow. Even her sister Narcissa wasn't officially part of Voldemort's inner circle. It's ironic, considering all the talk about representation, how few women served the Dark Lord. Number 6. Voldemort wasn't her only attachment. Yes, Bellatrix was clearly obsessed with Voldemort. Her marriage to Rodolphus was meaningless, but there's one unexpected connection hinted at in the books. Kreacher, the Black family's house elf. He kept a photo of Bellatrix and spoke of her with rare warmth. That's unusual for someone as bitter as Kreacher. It suggests she may have treated him with some degree of kindness, or at least respect. Perhaps, in her own twisted way, Bellatrix was capable of affection. Number 7. Voldemort's blood status didn't matter to her. Voldemort was a half-blood. His father was a muggle. Though he hid that fact, Bellatrix surely knew Ian simply didn't care. Her devotion went beyond pure blood ideology. She accepted him, flaws, secrets, and all. Even his unnatural appearance didn't matter to her. Her loyalty wasn't just about blood, it was about belief. Number 8. She didn't attend Hogwarts with Snape. Many fans think Bellatrix and Snape were classmates. They weren't. Bellatrix was born in 1951 and started Hogwarts in 1962. Snape wasn't born until 1960, meaning he didn't arrive at the school until long after Bellatrix had graduated. They were both Slytherins, both drawn to the dark arts, but they never sat in the same classroom. Number 9. She didn't hate her whole family. It's often assumed Bellatrix despised her family after joining Voldemort, but the truth is more nuanced. She didn't hate all of them, only the traitors. The ones who stood with her? She loved them deeply. Her bond with Narcissa was real. Strong, protective, fierce. In Half-Blood Prince, she refuses to let Narcissa go to Snape alone. "You should not be here," she hisses, The Dark Lord forbade it. And yet, she follows. Not to stop her, but to protect her. She didn't trust Snape. She feared for her sister. Even when the Malfoys lost favour with Voldemort, Bellatrix stayed close. She scolded them, worried for them, but she stayed. When the Sword of Gryffindor appeared at Malfoy Manor, her panic wasn't just for herself. She feared what Voldemort would do to them. That's not hatred, that's loyalty. Number 10, she wasn't afraid of Voldemort. Some say Bellatrix feared Voldemort, that she followed him out of terror. They couldn't be more wrong. She didn't fear him, she worshipped him. Her eyes burned with obsession, not fear. In Half-Blood Prince, she demands that Snape prove his loyalty, not to protect herself, but to protect Voldemort's trust. Her devotion was ravenous. When she spoke of him, her voice softened. When she looked at him, her body language shifted. She longed to be near him, to be chosen, valued, every curse, every death, done for him. Not out of fear, but hope. Hope that he would notice her, approve of her. If she had feared him, she would have flinched. She never did. Not even when he raised his voice, not even when he punished. At Malfoy Manor, as his fury grew, Bellatrix didn't retreat. She leaned in, desperate, loyal, craving command, never mercy. Number 11, she felt no regrets, until she did. Bellatrix Lestrange was the embodiment of cruelty. Cold, unforgiving, a storm of darkness and screams. She laughed at agony, smiled through torture. No guilt, no fear, or so it seemed. But even monsters have fractures, and one of hers split open at Malfoy Manor. The moment her eyes landed on the Sword of Gryffindor, everything changed. It wasn't supposed to be there. It was supposed to be locked away in her vault at Gringotts, guarded, untouchable, sacred. Her breath hitched, her eyes widened. And then the panic came, swift and brutal. "Where did you get this sword?" she shrieked, voice cracking. Not rage, not yet. First, fear, raw and real. Bellatrix, Voldemort's chosen, his most fanatical, was terrified. This wasn't a simple mistake, it was an unforgivable failure. Her trust, her honor, her standing, violated. Something precious had been taken right from under her nose. The shame cut deeper than any spell, and Bellatrix didn't do shame. She lashed out, screaming, cursing, torturing. Not from strength, but from terror, from the crumbling image of perfection. She turned on Hermione like a viper, but it wasn't really Hermione she was punishing. It was herself. That night, something inside Bellatrix fractured. She didn't break, but she bent. Her fury wasn't pure anymore. It was laced with guilt, with failure. She hadn't been perfect. She had let him down. No, she wasn't heartless. She just buried everything beneath obsession, beneath loyalty. But for one horrifying moment it surfaced. And in that sliver of time, Bellatrix Lestrange looked painfully, tragically human. Number 12. She was cruel, but never mindless. Yes, Bellatrix was cruel, but never aimless. Her violence was not chaos, it was conviction. Every spell, every scream, every scar had a purpose. Twisted, yes, but deliberate. People call her mad, a wild dog, a loose cannon, but they misunderstand her entirely. Bellatrix was a zealot, a soldier of ideology. When she destroyed Frank and Alice Longbottom, she wasn't just torturing, she was interrogating. She believed they had answers. She believed pain would reveal them. And when they didn't speak, she broke them anyway, because belief doesn't require results. It requires sacrifice. At her trial, she stood proudly. "The Dark Lord will rise again," she declared, not apologizing, not regretting, celebrating as if she had done something sacred. Years later, she carved into Hermione's skin, not for pleasure, for purpose. "Where did you get this?" she howled. "This sword was in my vault." It was personal. It was sacrilege. And so she made Hermione bleed for it. Bellatrix didn't attack at random. She had a code, a twisted gospel. You were either loyal or you were nothing. Her spells were sermons, her curses doctrine. That's why she never touched Draco. Even when he failed, he had blood, name, allegiance. She protected him, But Snape? She watched him like a wolf, not because he was weak, but because he hesitated, and to hesitate was to betray. She laughed in battle not from joy, but from control. It was dominance. Fear was her favorite weapon, and she wielded it before the first wand even lifted. Number 13, her death was no accident. Bellatrix Lestrange didn't die because of luck. She didn't trip. She wasn't distracted. She was defeated. It was war, and she lost. Some fans still argue it was a fluke. Molly Weasley got lucky. Bellatrix underestimated her, but they weren't watching closely. That moment wasn't a stumble. It was a reckoning. She had nearly killed Ginny, laughed while doing it, spinning radiant with cruelty, until Molly stepped in, small, calm, resolute. "Not my daughter, you bitch!" she roared, and the sky cracked open. Bellatrix grinned, thought it was a joke, a housewife with no battlefield record, no dark legacy, but Molly wasn't just a mother. She was a storm that had been quietly brewing for years. This wasn't a duel, it was a clash of purpose. Bellatrix fought for power, Molly fought for love, and love, when sharpened, can cut deeper than hate ever could. Bellatrix laughed, dodged, mocked, but Molly struck with precision, with fury refined by grief. Every spell was a lifetime of pain hurled like lightning, and then one final strike, straight through. Bellatrix froze, her eyes wide, disbelieving, then silence, then dust. Voldemort turned, and in his eyes, for the first time, shock. His fiercest weapon had been shattered by a mother in an apron. It wasn't luck, it was destiny, it was love's vengeance. Bellatrix's fall was not a twist of fate, it was justice. Number 14, she despised cowardice, not weakness. Bellatrix Lestrange didn't despise weak magic. She despised weak souls, fearful hands, hesitant hearts, people who flinched instead of fighting. That's what disgusted her. It wasn't about skill, it was about spirit. If you had fire, rage, belief, defiance, she might hate you, but she'd respect you. She'd even teach you, crush you first, maybe. But if you proved your worth to the Dark Lord, she'd raise you from the ashes. Draco Malfoy, he had no fire, not really, but she didn't scorn him. In Half-Blood Prince, she watched him not with contempt, but with concern. "The Dark Lord has ordered Draco to perform a task," she told Snape. Her voice was tight. She was afraid for him, not because he was unworthy, but because he was unready. At Malfoy Manor, her rage exploded, not at Draco, at the situation. If they had captured the wrong Harry, they were all doomed, and Draco would be first to suffer. "He'll kill us all," she screamed. That wasn't panic for herself. That was protection, for the boy who once sat on her lap. But Peter Pettigrew, that was different. He crawled, he begged, he hid behind others. She sneered at him like filth. "Be grateful," she snapped. "The Dark Lord may still find use for you." Not because he lacked strength, but because he lacked conviction. To Bellatrix, spells were tools. Faith was power. Belief made you deadly. Cowardice made you dead. Number 15, her wand wasn't evil, she was. Bellatrix Lestrange's wand was feared, but not because it was ancient or enchanted. It was feared because of her. Made of walnut with a dragon heartstring core, it wasn't rare. Ollivander had made many just like it. But as he once said, walnut wands often choose witches with insight and ambition. Bellatrix had both, in terrifying measure. She didn't use the wand, she danced with it. Each curse was art, each spell a scream from her soul. In the Department of Mysteries, her magic cracked the air like thunder. Sirius Black, her own cousin, fell by her hand. "You need to mean it, Potter," she whispered, and she always meant it every time. Fans whisper rumors that her wand was soaked in blood magic, that it could only obey her. None of it's true, it was just wood, just a wand. But in her grip, it became something darker, something alive. Even Hermione later held it. "It's elegant," she said, but the wand didn't resist. It had no memory, no soul, it was just a stick again. The evil had died with its master, because it was never the wand, it was the woman who held it, twisted, obsessed, set aflame by lies. Bellatrix Lestrange didn't need cursed tools. Her heart was cursed enough. Number 16, she never doubted him until it was too late. Bellatrix Lestrange stood in the shadows of Malfoy Manor, her wand clenched tight, the air heavy with candle smoke and dread. Lord Voldemort, radiant with menace, loomed in the centre like a black sun, drawing all light into himself. And yet, for the first time in years, something shifted in Bellatrix's chest. Not defiance, not disloyalty, but a flicker, a whisper, a question. He had just humiliated Lucius. Broken Draco with a glance, made Narcissa cower like a scolded dog. Bellatrix watched it all unfold, her blood, her family, reduced to trembling shadows. And something in her soul stung. She had believed in him utterly. Since the moment he first looked her in the eye, not just seeing her noble bloodline, but her fire, her hunger, she had followed him with a devotion deeper than worship. She became his blade, his flame, his fury, the woman who carved madness into the Longbottoms, who laughed in Azkaban's darkness, who spat defiance in the face of death. And yet that night she looked away. When Voldemort stripped Lucius of his wand, she flinched. She who had faced Dementors with a grin. "My lord, my wand," Lucius had whispered. And Voldemort's reply? Ice and mockery. "You dare ask me for what I have taken?" Bellatrix didn't laugh. She didn't grin. She looked at the floor. It was nothing, a flicker, but it was the beginning. She had always known he was ruthless. That's why she followed him. But what she hadn't seen, what she refused to see, was that his ruthlessness spared no one, not even those who bled for him, not even family. When he summoned Nagini, the serpent she once adored, Bellatrix felt unease crawl under her skin. Voldemort spoke of Potter, of purity, of blood, but Bellatrix said nothing. Her voice, usually ready to sing his gospel, stayed trapped in her throat. Later, when Hermione Granger was thrown at her feet, Bellatrix played her old role. She carved, she tortured, she performed. But there was no joy, only urgency, fear, desperation. She wasn't punishing a mudblood. She was begging the darkness to drown that seed of doubt. When the rescue came, she grabbed Hermione like a shield. "Drop your wands!" she screamed, the knife at the girl's throat. But this wasn't a tactical move. It was panic. If she failed, if she let Potter escape, he would be angry. He would look at her the way he looked at Lucius. And she couldn't survive that. In the Battle of Hogwarts, she returned to form. She dueled like a demon, laughed like fire. But when Molly Weasley stepped forward, something cracked again. Bellatrix expected Voldemort to intervene, to protect her. Surely, she thought, his most faithful would not fall alone. But he didn't move. She died with that knowledge in her eyes. He would never save her. He never had. And maybe, just maybe, she had always known that. From the moment he mocked her family, she had started to understand. He wasn't her protector. He wasn't her god. He was her master. And masters don't love. They use. Still she loved him. That was the tragedy. That was the poison she drank willingly. Rowling wrote that the theft of the sword and Voldemort's suspicion had cost the Malfoys their last shred of prestige. But it wasn't just about the sword. Bellatrix knew. She knew the wrath that would follow. She had seen the fire before, and now she saw it was not warmth. It was hunger. Always hunger. Even his tone with her had changed. Gone were the purring compliments, the dark flirtations. Now, when she offered to kill Harry, he refused. "No, Bellatrix, he is mine." And she flinched. Bellatrix Lestrange, the feared, the fanatical, flinched like a frightened child. Number 17. She was far more than a killer. When Bellatrix Lestrange first emerged from Azkaban, she looked like a phantom, gaunt, wild-eyed, barely human. To the outside world, she was madness incarnate, a witch born for violence, for chaos, for blood. But that's not the whole truth. Bellatrix wasn't just a killer. She was a scholar of war, a priestess of pain, a master of her craft. She didn't stumble through magic, she sculpted it. 15 years in Azkaban would have shattered most witches. The Dementors feed on joy, on hope, on memory. But Bellatrix walked out unbroken. Her eyes gleamed with purpose. Her faith had not withered, it had calcified. That survival wasn't brute strength, it was mental mastery, it was occlumency. She had turned her mind into a fortress, sealed from torment, sealed from collapse. Snape, the Order's greatest spy, had to train endlessly to hide his thoughts from Voldemort. Bellatrix had done the same, silently, without help, in the darkest prison on earth. When she stood in the ministry, wand raised high, she was more than a duelist. She was a symbol. Sirius fell by her hand, not because of chance, but because of precision. "You have to mean it," she told Harry of the Cruciatus curse. And she meant every single one. But her power wasn't limited to destruction. Born into the noble house of Black, Bellatrix was raised in tradition, discipline, and ancient knowledge. She would have known potions before she could walk. She would have studied blood magic like scripture. She didn't brew publicly, but her mind, her instincts, her strategies all showed the training of someone steeped in subtlety. She saw through Snape when even Voldemort did not. She taught Narcissa how to manipulate, how to bait, how to survive. Her words weren't random. Her paranoia wasn't madness. It was intuition sharpened by survival. And when the trio broke into Gringotts, even Polyjuice couldn't fake her. The goblin sensed it immediately, not because Hermione said the wrong thing, but because she couldn't replicate Bellatrix's presence, her voice, her command, her weight. She wasn't just a woman, she was a force. In battle, she flowed like smoke and struck like lightning. She didn't just cast spells, she controlled space. She anticipated, adapted, devoured. In the Department of Mysteries, she outlasted every other Death Eater, not because she was lucky, because she was better. Even when she fell, cut down by a mother's fury, it wasn't weakness, it was exhaustion. Bellatrix had already fought through the night against dozens. She wasn't careless, she wasn't slow. She simply met something she had never understood. Love, turned into a weapon. And then she was gone. Her wand fell silent, her voice still. But the mark she left behind, that sharp feral scar across the world of magic, remained. She wasn't just a killer, she was the dark mirror of what brilliance becomes when it loses its soul. Number 18, she didn't always hate Harry Potter, but she died hating him. To most it seemed like Bellatrix Lestrange had always hated Harry Potter. Her every glance toward him dripped venom. Her every word was laced with contempt. But hatred like hers isn't born overnight. It isn't inherited like a surname. It grows, it festers, and for Bellatrix it started not with fury, but with insult. When Harry entered the wizarding world, Bellatrix was already buried in Azkaban, a madwoman in the shadows, imprisoned not for betrayal, but for loyalty. She had screamed Voldemort's name while the others denied him. "He will return," she declared in court, unrepentant, defiant. Harry Potter was irrelevant then, just a boy with a scar, a symbol, not a threat. But symbols become dangerous when they start to win. Their first true meeting wasn't in conversation, it was in war. In the Department of Mysteries, Bellatrix descended like fire, laughing as spells lit the air. When Sirius fell, her laughter echoed, but when Harry chased her, raw with grief, something shifted. He cast the Cruciatus curse, and it hit, weakly, clumsily, but it hit. Bellatrix didn't scream. She sneered. "You have to mean it," she spat. "You have to want to cause pain." But she wasn't mocking him. She was wounded. A child had dared touch her with darkness. A boy, untrained, untested, had reached into her sacred world of cruelty and imitated her. That was the beginning. From then on, Harry stopped being a symbol. He became a threat to her pride. She didn't fear his magic. She feared what he represented. a world where Voldemort could be defeated, where loyalty wasn't absolute, where love triumphed over fear. That world disgusted her. In Half-Blood Prince, her bitterness curdles. She watches as Voldemort gives more trust to Snape. She protests, she snarls, but he silences her. He doesn't look at her the way he once did. And Harry? Still alive, still growing stronger. Her fury boils. "Why hasn't he killed the boy?" she whispers between clenched teeth. She doesn't say it aloud, but the question festers. At Malfoy Manor, when she finds the sword of Gryffindor, her sacred vault, her untouched treasure defiled, she panics. And Harry is there again, always a step ahead. The rage becomes personal. When Dobby helps them escape and Harry vanishes yet again, Bellatrix's hatred hardens into obsession. He's no longer just the enemy, he's the humiliation she cannot bear. At Hogwarts, as the final battle rages, Bellatrix scans the chaos for him. Not to defend Voldemort, not even to win, but to find Harry, to end him, to prove, once and for all, that she is still worthy. But she never gets the chance. Instead, she faces Molly Weasley. She underestimates her, laughs, taunts, and dies. But make no mistake, she didn't die at Molly's hands. She died because of Harry, because he gave courage to those she once silenced, because he taught the world to stop fearing monsters. And Voldemort, the man she worshipped, did not scream for her. He did not cry out. He didn't even blink. That, in the end, was the final insult. The boy she hated most was everything she could never be. Loved, trusted, and free. Number 19, her hatred of Muggles. Wasn't born, it was built. Bellatrix Black was raised on legends. At number 12, Grimmauld Place, she wandered halls lined with oil portraits and pure-blooded pride. Her mother traced the Black family tree with reverence, skipping over the burned-out names with disdain. Her father taught her that magic wasn't just a gift, it was a crown. "You are not like them, Bella," he would say. "You are better." She believed him. But in those early years, Bellatrix didn't hate Muggles. She didn't even understand them. What she feared, what she despised, was disorder, rebellion, Sirius. Her cousin was fire and defiance, always questioning, always mocking. Bellatrix didn't hate him then, not truly. She pitied him. How could someone raised in greatness choose filth? At Hogwarts, sorted into Slytherin without hesitation, she met others like herself, Rosier, Mulciber, Dolohov. The whispers of superiority hardened into doctrine. Mudblood became more than a slur. It became a line in the sand. She crossed it proudly. But even then it was mimicry, performance, until she heard the name Tom Riddle. By then he was no longer a student. He was a shadow, a myth, a movement. His followers gathered in Nocturne Alley, whispering of purity, of rebirth, of war. Bellatrix didn't hesitate. She was drawn to him like a moth to a flame, not for his power, but for his certainty. He didn't suggest superiority. He demanded it. "You, Bellatrix, were born to serve," he said, the night he branded her with the dark mark. And she believed him. From that moment on, she didn't just echo hatred, she embodied it. Muggle-borns weren't people, they were pollution. Her orders were simple: hunt, torture, destroy. And she obeyed, not for pleasure, not even for belief, but because Voldemort had told her it was truth. Her most infamous act wasn't about Muggles, it was about proving herself. Frank and Alice Longbottom. She didn't hate them, but they were the enemy, and the Dark Lord had fallen. She needed someone to hurt, someone to break. "They'll tell us where he is," she screamed as she cast Cruciatus again and again. And when they broke, she smiled. At her trial, she showed no remorse, no fear. "He will return," she vowed, "and we will be honored." Years passed. Azkaban could not strip away her faith. She whispered his name to the walls, and when he returned for her, she rose from darkness reborn. Bellatrix Lestrange didn't hesitate anymore. She killed Sirius, her cousin, her blood, and felt no sorrow. She hunted children, slashed Hermione's skin, laughed at Neville's pain. She didn't need to know them, didn't want to. Understanding breeds doubt, and Bellatrix could not afford doubt. Her hatred became her armor, but even hatred has roots. It began as a lesson, fed by family. It grew into belief, sharpened by school. It transformed into dogma under Voldemort. And finally, it consumed her, completely. When she fell to Molly Weasley screaming about blood and family, she wasn't just dying, she was being erased by the very thing she had spent her life trying to destroy: love. Not all monsters are born. Some are raised, trained, fed, until their humanity starves. Bellatrix was one of them. And in the end, all that remained was a name on a wall, a body on the floor, and a silence too loud to ignore. Number 20, she always dreamed of becoming Voldemort's right hand. Bellatrix Lestrange never dreamed of a crown. She didn't crave dominion. She didn't scheme like Lucius or manipulate like Snape. Her ambitions weren't soaked in gold or titles. They were drenched in crimson. The crimson of the dark mark, the crimson of Voldemort's eyes. While others clawed for proximity to power, she burned for proximity to him, to his voice, to his command. She didn't want to rule beside the Dark Lord. She wanted to kneel in his shadow. She could have disappeared into obscurity if it meant hearing the hiss of his voice behind a curtain. Her place among his most trusted wasn't ambition, it was inevitability. Worship this complete always leaves a mark. It's easy to flatten her into the image of a bloodthirsty witch hungering for authority, but that would be a mistake. Bellatrix's obsession was deeper than politics. It wasn't about rising, it was about surrender. Even at Hogwarts, long before she bore the Lestrange name, Bellatrix Black whispered about Tom Riddle with a fervour that unsettled her peers. Andromeda noticed it first. "It's not a crush," she once murmured. "It's devotion." Narcissa dismissed it as dramatics, but their mother saw it for what it was. "That girl," Druella once told her husband, "is dangerous." Because she believes. And believe she did. In Voldemort she saw not a man but a prophecy fulfilled. When her skin was branded with the dark mark, she didn't scream in pain, she smiled. It wasn't a brand to her, it was a sacrament. She would touch it softly in the dark, murmuring to herself like a nun with a rosary. "He is everything," she once whispered to Rodolphus. "We are only what he allows." Her husband? A placeholder? A name? Her real vow was given elsewhere. During the First War, when Voldemort trusted her with the most intimate missions, Bellatrix never asked for recognition. "My lord, I am yours," she would say, forehead to floor. While Lucius navigated politics and whispered for favor, Bellatrix lived for orders. Orders meant purpose. Orders meant he had thought of her. The trial after Voldemort's fall was her transformation into myth. The others pleaded, denied, cried, but Bellatrix stood tall, eyes alight with something sick and holy. "The Dark Lord will rise again," she declared, "and when he does, we will be ready." Even Barty Crouch Sr. looked shaken. She didn't fear Azkaban, she welcomed it. She called it suffering in his name. 15 years passed, and when she returned, she wasn't broken. She was honed, sharper, more devout. When she met Lucius in the Department of Mysteries, she hissed, "He knows I'm loyal." She was the only one who believed that loyalty should hurt. Sirius Black fell by her hand, a cousin, yes, but in her eyes a traitor, a stain. She laughed when he fell, not because of malice, but because the act felt pure. It was, in her mind, a gift to the Dark Lord. Among Death Eaters, she was both feared and resented. Not for her cruelty, they were all cruel, but for her joy in submission. She volunteered for the darkest tasks. Interrogation was not a duty, it was worship. When Snape dared question her zeal, she turned on him like a flame. "Do not presume to understand him," she growled. "He trusts me, that is enough." She viewed Snape as clever, too clever. "He lacks love," she said once, "and our Lord deserves love." Love. That's the word she used. Not allegiance, not respect. Love. Even Narcissa recoiled at it. But Bellatrix said it with pride, with certainty. She would have kissed Voldemort's hem. Perhaps she did. Rowling never wrote that scene, but the silence of the books is often louder than the words. In Half-Blood Prince, when Snape makes the unbreakable vow, Bellatrix watches with bitter eyes. "He doesn't trust me," she mutters, "but he trusts him." Her voice cracks, not from envy of power, but intimacy. She didn't want command, she wanted closeness. She wanted to be the one he called upon in the dark. Her torture of Alice and Frank Longbottom wasn't about information, it was an act of faith. Voldemort was gone, and in her eyes they were the reason. Breaking them wasn't a task, it was a ritual. When Neville faces her years later, she sneers. "Your parents were strong, he would have approved." She doesn't speak of Voldemort in the past tense, she never does. For Bellatrix, he never died, he simply withdrew to test her. And she passed. Gringotts was proof of that. Her vault didn't house treasure, it held sacred relics. The Hufflepuff cup was not hers, it was his. She would never touch it without permission. When she discovers it may have been stolen, her panic is apocalyptic. "What else did you take?" she screams. Not for herself, for him, because his trust was the only thing she feared losing. Even her battle style was liturgy. Every spell, every scream, every curse was part of a sermon. When she fought Tonks, she snarled, "You dare fight me, I who serve him with every breath." It wasn't arrogance, it was disbelief. As if Tonks had blasphemed by resisting, and when she duelled beside Voldemort at Hogwarts, it was a dream fulfilled. She had made it. She was at his side, his soldier, his sword, his offering. Molly Weasley's curse didn't just kill her, it canonized her. She died in battle, laughing, believing he watched. That was enough. Her life had purpose. Her death had purpose. Others wanted power. She wanted belonging. Others wanted thrones. She wanted his voice in her ear. That was the difference. Bellatrix Lestrange wasn't just a fanatic. She was a martyr. And she never doubted she was right where she belonged, kneeling in the shadow of her God. Number 22. She never loved her husband. Bellatrix Lestrange walked into Spinner's End with a predator's grace, her wand already half raised before the greetings began. She said nothing of Rodolphus. She never needed to. In that moment, her purpose was singular, Lord Voldemort. The darkness that clung to her like a second skin wasn't born of grief or longing for her husband. It was devotion, obsession, and twisted reverence for the Dark Lord. Yet, in her silence, there was something often overlooked. Rodolphus Lestrange, bound to her by name, blood, and purpose, remained a phantom behind her presence, a man who shared her path, but never her spotlight. To say she never loved him is simple, too simple. Love, for Bellatrix, was not softness, it was war. Their marriage was arranged, as most within the sacred 28 were. Bellatrix Black, daughter of Cygnus and Druella, was not expected to fall in love. She was expected to marry well to reinforce the Black legacy. Rodolphus fit the criteria: pure blood, powerful, aligned in values. The match was not for sentiment, but for strategy. But what happens when two warriors, equally ambitious and equally merciless, are chained together, not by affection, but by ideology? What grows in that soil is not flowers, but thorns, and thorns can still bind. During the First Wizarding War, Rodolphus fought alongside Bellatrix, not behind her, not in her shadow, alongside. They stood together during the siege on the Bones family. They duelled auras with unyielding cruelty, and most significantly, they tortured Frank and Alice Longbottom into madness. It wasn't an accident that the four were sentenced together: Bellatrix, Rodolphus, Rabastan, and Barty Crouch Jr. That shared sentence marked them as the most loyal, the most unrepentant. Bellatrix never pled for mercy, neither did her husband. 10 years in Azkaban followed, 10 years with nothing but darkness, dementors, and the echo of what they had done. Bellatrix came out of Azkaban hollow-eyed but intact. Her mind was fractured, yes, but her faith in Voldemort unbroken. And Rodolphus? He followed. In Order of the Phoenix, when the breakout occurs, they do not part ways. He is not mentioned by name in her scenes, but he is there. That's who he was, present, constant, and silent. A figure beside her, not a distraction, not a burden, but an extension of her cause. Throughout the series, Bellatrix is emotionally volatile, wild laughter, vicious cruelty, gleeful sadism, and yet she rarely shows tenderness, even toward her own family. She mocks Sirius before killing him, she taunts her niece, but there's a curious gap in her behavior when it comes to Rodolphus. She never ridicules him, never curses his name. In a woman as expressive as Bellatrix, that void is not emptiness, it is a boundary. She reserves her scorn for the weak. Rodolphus, she must have seen, was strong. In The Half-Blood Prince, Narcissa pleads with Snape to protect Draco. Bellatrix follows, filled with suspicion. Her mistrust is not born from fear for her sister, but from paranoia that anyone could usurp her closeness to the Dark Lord. Still, her husband's name never enters the conversation. It's not because he's irrelevant. It's because he does not interfere. He knows her mind, he knows her heart, and he does not try to own either. That in itself is a rare kind of intimacy. In The Cursed Child, which, while controversial, is part of the extended canon, Rodolphus is credited with revealing the existence of Bellatrix's daughter, Delphi, the child of Voldemort and Bellatrix. If such a union occurred, Rodolphus's silence becomes monumental. He knew, and yet he said nothing while she lived. There was no vengeance, no rage, only cold, respectful distance to watch the woman you married give herself, body and soul, to another, and remain devoted even after her death, is not weakness. It is the kind of painful strength few recognize. It is possible that Bellatrix chose Rodolphus not for love, but for usefulness. But usefulness is a kind of respect. She would not have aligned herself with someone beneath her. Her standards were brutal. Her loyalty was iron. She did not suffer fools. And Rodolphus? He never gave her reason to strike. That, from Bellatrix, was a gesture louder than affection. Imagine them in Azkaban, she pacing in her cell, muttering Voldemort's name like a sacred chant. He, sitting still, eyes hollow. They could not see each other, could not speak, but they knew the other was there. 10 years of isolation, 10 years of torment, and neither cracked. When Voldemort finally returned, they answered his call, without hesitation, without resentment. They were a unit, forged in torment, driven by belief. Bellatrix's obsession with Voldemort was singular. "He is the Dark Lord," she said in The Half-Blood Prince, "the most powerful wizard, the most worthy." Her love was worship. But even in her worship she did not forget Rodolphus. She simply did not center him. She was not a woman built to share hearts, but she shared purpose, she shared blood, and she shared silence. In their world, silence was safer than words. Rodolphus, for all his loyalty, fades from the narrative after Bellatrix's death. He does not avenge her. He does not cry. He does not even speak. But that doesn't mean he forgets. Imagine him, after the Battle of Hogwarts, kneeling among the ruins. Not weeping, simply remembering the way she moved in battle, the sound of her laughter after a duel, the glint in her eyes when Voldemort praised her. He knew what she was, and he never asked her to be anything else. Love, in the world of Death Eaters, was dangerous. It made you weak. It exposed you. Bellatrix refused to be exposed. Her love for Voldemort, twisted and unreturned, was already a wound. She would not open another. So she kept Rodolphus at arm's length, not out of contempt, but out of caution. Because to show him kindness was to risk everything, and she would risk nothing that could distract from her devotion. Still, when Voldemort looked around, he often praised the Lestranges. "My most faithful," he called them, not just Bellatrix, them. Rodolphus earned that title not by shouting, but by standing firm. Bellatrix never corrected her master, never asked to be singled out. She accepted the plural. She accepted Rodolphus as her equal in loyalty. And perhaps that is what bound them. Not hearts, not romance, but parity. In a world of betrayal, of shifting allegiances, Rodolphus stood still. He did not flinch when the Dark Lord fell. He did not break in prison. He did not run when the war resumed. And Bellatrix, fierce and wild as she was, never cast him aside. She simply did not speak of him. Her silence was not rejection. It was recognition that words were useless for what they had. If Bellatrix had loved in the way novels describe, it would have been dramatic, consuming, but her love was action. She shared cells, crimes, blood oaths. She trusted Rodolphus to kill beside her. She trusted him with her life. And that, to a warrior, is love. Her death was theatrical. Bellatrix, dueling Molly Weasley, laughing maniacally, reveling in the chaos. When she fell with her face twisted in glee. She did not scream for help, did not cry for her master, did not think of her husband, but Rodolphus, wherever he was, would have known she died exactly as she wished, in battle, unrepentant, unchanged. Rodolphus was not there to cradle her body. He was not there to cry over her grave. He likely never had one to visit. But in the shadows that followed, in the echo of what was lost, he remained the last witness, the last survivor of a bond that was never romantic, never tender, but unmistakably real. Bellatrix was not a woman who loved conventionally. Her love twisted around power, destruction, loyalty. But within that dark framework, Rodolphus existed. He endured. He stood beside her without demanding her heart, and perhaps that, above all, is why she never dismissed him. She didn't need to love him like a husband. She needed him to be there, and he always was. That is not nothing. That is not lovelessness. That is a kind of love shaped by war, by silence, by fire. A love without kisses, but with shared purpose, shared suffering, and shared fate. Number 23. She always hated Sirius Black. Bellatrix Lestrange stood on the crumbling edge of destiny the night she killed Sirius Black. The world saw only the spell, the veil, the laugh, sharp and shrill like shattered glass. They saw madness. They saw hatred. But what they didn't see, what they never could see, was the way her heart had cracked long before her wand ever did. Sirius was not just another enemy in the war, he was the ghost of what could have been, and the blade she thrust into him was forged of betrayal, not fury. He was her cousin, but that word, cousin, meant little in the House of Black unless it served bloodline or glory. They had once run through the long halls of number 12 Grimmauld Place, two shadows darting between the legs of elves and the heavy rustling of ancient drapes. Their childhood was not one of warmth, but of rule and expectation. Bellatrix, the eldest of her sisters, was groomed to be the perfect daughter, cold, brilliant, pure. Sirius was the spark, the flame licking at the foundations. They had clashed from the start, not because they were different, but because they were too alike. Both were fierce, both were proud, both refused to kneel. But where Bellatrix bowed to legacy, Sirius spat in its face. She remembered the days before the fracture, when Sirius still lingered on the edge of obedience in testing boundaries like a lion cub baring its fangs in play. She had laughed then, had called him our little lion. He roared against the rules but stayed within reach. Bellatrix believed it was a game, a tantrum, a thing he'd grow out of. In her twisted affection, she imagined him beside her one day, both of them loyal to the same cause, fighting to preserve their family's name in an increasingly contaminated world. But then came the sorting. Sirius in Gryffindor. The name alone was enough to freeze her blood. He had chosen the enemy, the house of blood traitors and half-blood lovers. Still, Bellatrix held on to the idea that it was a mistake, a rebellion without meaning. Yet the years only proved her wrong. While she delved deeper into the sacred tenets of blood purity, Sirius turned his back on all of it. He befriended Muggleborns. He insulted their parents. He defended Andromeda when Bellatrix spat on her for marrying a Muggleborn. "She's still our cousin," he had snapped, fists clenched, cheeks flushed with fury. Bellatrix had struck him then. Her hand shook afterward, not from regret, but from something far worse, fear that he might be right. His final betrayal didn't come until she saw his name among the Order of the Phoenix. There, etched beside Alastair Moody and Emmeline Vance, was the name of the boy she once knew, a name that belonged to the House of Black. But Sirius Black had written it anew in fire. He had become the enemy not just in ideology, but in action. He wasn't some idealistic child anymore. He was a soldier against everything she stood for. And in that moment, something within her curled into ash. Bellatrix had endured everything for the cause. She had married Rodolphus not for love, but for legacy. She had pledged her soul to Lord Voldemort, believing he was the hand of destiny. Her loyalty was fanatic, her pride unshakable. But Sirius had chosen freedom, chosen filth, chosen light. And still he thrived. He laughed, he fought, he survived. It made her furious, it made her weak, because he had been hers once, in blood, in childhood, in trust. The war took him from her before she could reclaim that narrative. While she carved terror into the world for the Dark Lord, Sirius was cast into Azkaban. She followed soon after, but her imprisonment was a sacrifice she cherished. She wore it like a mark of honor, but when word came that Sirius had escaped, that he had slipped past the Dementors, her pride curdled. He had defied the same cage that defined her. He had made it meaningless. Years passed, the world changed, and then, like fate circling in on itself, she saw him again in the Department of Mysteries. He was older, leaner, wild-eyed and feral, with the long confinement of his soul. But he was still Sirius, still that boy who mocked and dared and lived too freely. Bellatrix had waited for that moment, not to kill him, but to destroy him. She wanted to crush his fire, grind it beneath her heel, prove that he was a mistake of youth and nothing more. But he didn't fear her. He grinned, that maddening grin that cut deeper than any spell. The battle was chaos. Spells ricocheted like storms around them, but to her only Sirius existed. She hurled magic not to end but to wound. She wanted him on his knees. She wanted him to say she had been right. That family meant power, that blood mattered. But Sirius gave her nothing. He deflected, he teased, he called her mad. And somewhere inside, the twisted root of what once was love roared in agony. The curse she cast was not green. It was not final. It was rage and heartbreak and everything she could not say. It struck him cleanly, too cleanly, and sent him through the veil. She had not planned that, had not meant it to end, but he was gone. Her scream rang out across the stone like a hymn of victory and grief. "I killed Sirius Black," she cried, her voice pitched in manic delight. Her laughter was a mask. Her eyes betrayed her. They shimmered not with triumph, but with something else, something too fragile to name. In her madness, she told herself it was justice, that he had earned his end. But the truth curled in the corners of her thoughts like smoke. Sirius had once stood with her under the same roof within the same world, and she had lost him, not to death, but to choice. He had chosen love, chosen mercy, chosen to believe that the world could be more than legacy and blood. Bellatrix remembered him chasing her through the halls with a wooden sword, declaring war on the demented Princess of Black. He had called her that in jest, and she had laughed until their mother scolded them both. Those memories were poisoned now. They surfaced only in dreams, coated in guilt and loss. She lied to the Dark Lord. She told him Sirius was a threat, that killing him was a favor. "He was a disgrace," she whispered, trembling. Voldemort studied her then, that snake-like gaze piercing past her words. "You seem emotional, Bellatrix." She bowed deeply, voice composed, only at the thought of how he defiled our name. But he haunted her. Long after the veil, after the wars, after the silence. In every rebel she saw his shadow. In every Gryffindor that rose against her, she heard his voice. She hated that she remembered, that even as she served her master, a part of her mourned something she would never admit existed. There is a kind of hatred that feeds on betrayal, that grows roots in affection denied. Bellatrix Lestrange did not hate Sirius Black because he opposed her. She hated him because he once mattered, because he had been a mirror, and because he had shattered it with his choices. When Narcissa whispered his name with sorrow, Bellatrix had scoffed. "Let him rot," she said. But her voice was tight, her jaw clenched. For all her loyalty to the cause, Sirius remained the only piece of her past that refused to be buried. She had burned bridges with everyone else, but with him the fire still smouldered. Even in the end, as she died at the hands of Molly Weasley, her final breath a scream of indignation, there was a flicker of something unspoken. She had lived for Voldemort, killed for blood. But a part of her had died long before that battle, in a quiet room in Grimmauld Place. When a boy she once loved said, "Blood doesn't make you family, Bella, choices do." And she had never forgiven him. Number 24, she was a bad sister to Andromeda. Bellatrix Black was a girl of fire, born with the storm of the Black family legacy already woven into her bones. She was raised in the vast and echoing corridors of Black Manor, where every step fell under the watchful eyes of grim ancestors glaring from painted portraits, and every breath carried the weight of ancient expectation. Her sisters, Narcissa and Andromeda, moved through that same ancestral silence, 3 stars in a cold constellation. Andromeda was the softest, the most open-hearted. Narcissa was elegant, compliant, clever in the ways of survival. But Bellatrix burned the brightest and the most destructively. Their childhood was not filled with love, but it had its own kind of warmth. The shared mischief of slipping away from tutors, the thrill of exploring rooms filled with forgotten relics, the secrecy of whispered laughter behind velvet curtains. Andromeda, despite her quiet defiance, adored her older sisters. She looked up to Bellatrix, whose courage felt like protection, whose magic sparkled like lightning. Once, when Andromeda tripped and scraped her knee in the rose garden, it was Bellatrix who healed her with a muttered charm, followed by a threat to curse the thorns into ash. That was the shape of Bellatrix's love, violent, possessive, unsparing. The first shadow fell when Bellatrix started to speak of purity. She was 10. Their parents praised her. "She understands what it means to be a Black," Druella said over supper. Andromeda looked down at her plate. Narcissa adjusted the pearl clip in her hair. No one disagreed. But something in Bellatrix's gaze had changed. It had hardened. At Hogwarts the cracks widened. Bellatrix flourished in Slytherin, dominating the common room with her fierce intelligence and sharper tongue. She excelled in dark arts and revelled in her bloodline's esteem. She spoke of the coming reckoning, of blood traitors and filth. Yet, even then, she watched Andromeda closely. When Andromeda joined the Gobstones Club with a Muggle-born, Bellatrix scoffed, but the jealousy in her eyes was unmistakable. Andromeda had found joy outside the bounds of their world. Bellatrix, for all her pride, had only chains. In her 5th year, Bellatrix was caught dueling a Ravenclaw prefect who had insulted the sacred 28. She did not deny it. She had carved the word impure into his books with a wand flick. When questioned by Professor McGonagall, Bellatrix stood tall and said, "I only defend what matters." The detention did nothing. Her belief had calcified into conviction. It was around this time she began to meet others who whispered the name Voldemort. Andromeda's defiance was quieter. She helped a younger Muggle-born fix a broken wand in the library. She asked uncomfortable questions in history of magic about the persecution of non-purebloods. She stayed friends with Emmeline Vance and Marlene McKinnon, both from families the Blacks despised. Bellatrix wrote home about it, while Burger Black's reply was swift and furious. "Correct your sister's path, or she will be lost to us." Bellatrix tried. She cornered Andromeda outside the charms classroom and whispered things meant to terrify. But Andromeda only looked at her, eyes wide with disappointment. That look pierced deeper than any spell. Bellatrix never forgot it. When Andromeda fell in love with Ted Tonks, the war within the family began in earnest. Ted was Muggle-born, affable, bright, and exactly the kind of man Bellatrix believed had no right to breathe the same air as her kin. When she discovered the relationship, Bellatrix wrote it off as rebellion, a phase, a test of boundaries. But Andromeda did not stop. She brought Ted to Hogsmeade, introduced him to friends. She smiled in public. The shame was unbearable. After Hogwarts, Bellatrix confronted her sister in the grand drawing room of Black Manor. The air crackled with unshed curses. When Andromeda confessed she was leaving the family, marrying Ted, Bellatrix felt something inside her rupture. She could not understand not only the betrayal of blood, but the leaving. Andromeda had chosen someone else over her. Their parents disowned Andromeda. Her name was burned from the family tapestry with a blast of cursed fire. Bellatrix watched the flame erase her sister. She did not flinch, but Narcissa later found her kneeling in the attic, staring at an old photo of the three of them on their broomsticks, Andromeda laughing as her hair blew wildly in the wind. Bellatrix didn't speak. She never mentioned Andromeda again. When Bellatrix joined the Death Eaters, it was not merely ideology, it was hunger. She wanted power, vengeance, a place where love would never betray her. She swore loyalty to the Dark Lord with trembling lips and burning eyes. "He is the future," she said, and she meant it. But deep down, beneath the madness, was the cold bruise of loss. In the Order of the Phoenix, Sirius shows the family tapestry to Harry. "Andromeda's name's been blasted off," he says with a bitter smile, "because she married a Muggle-born." He speaks it like fact, but he does not mention Bellatrix's role. He doesn't have to. Her silence was her verdict. Bellatrix married Rodolphus Lestrange not for love, but for power. They were a formidable pair in the ranks of Voldemort's followers, feared for their cruelty. But their marriage was hollow. She loved no one the way she had once loved her sisters. She had traded every bond for a throne of bones. Years later, when the war raged and the Dark Lord returned, Bellatrix's descent into fanaticism was complete. She tortured Alice and Frank Longbottom into madness, laughing as she destroyed them. "He will rise again," she screamed in court, "and we will be honored beyond measure." There was no remorse, only devotion. Andromeda was never mentioned, but when the name Tonks surfaced, Nymphadora Tonks, Auror, member of the Order, half-blood daughter of Andromeda and Ted, Bellatrix reacted with venom. She mocked the girl's name, spat curses under her breath. Some say she warned Voldemort personally. "That girl is a disgrace. The blood of traitors runs through her veins." In The Half-Blood Prince, Bellatrix accompanies Narcissa to Severus Snape's home. She doesn't trust him. Her questions are sharp, her tone lethal. But when Narcissa pleads for her son's life, Bellatrix hesitates. For all her fury, she cannot deny her sister. She allows the unbreakable vow. Family, it seemed, still held some shadow of power over her. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Bellatrix fights like a demon. Her wand is unrelenting, her laughter manic. But when she comes face to face with Nymphadora Tonks, it is not madness that drives her. It is something colder. The duel is swift, merciless, and when Tonks falls, her body crumpled beside Remus Lupin's, no one sees Bellatrix's face, but it is known. J.K. Rowling confirmed it. Bellatrix killed her own niece. There is no line in the book that describes her expression, no quote to anchor the moment. But it is easy to imagine her fury, not only at Tonks but at what Tonks represented. She was the future Bellatrix tried to burn, a daughter of freedom, a legacy born from the love Bellatrix had sworn to hate. Andromeda buried her husband and her daughter within days. She held Teddy Lupin in her arms, the last piece of a family broken by war. She raised him alone, strong, quiet, dignified, like the girl she once was. She never spoke of Bellatrix, not once. Bellatrix died at the hands of Molly Weasley, a mother fighting for her daughter. "Not my daughter, you bitch!" Molly screamed, and Bellatrix's laughter froze on her lips. The killing curse struck her in the chest. She crumpled, not with grace, but with finality. Her death was not mourned by many, but in the silence after, perhaps the ghosts stirred. In her final moments, did she think of Andromeda, of the locket, the laughter, the broomstick summers, or had those memories been too thoroughly burned away? She had become a creature of ideology, but once she had been a girl who loved fiercely. That love had turned to ash in her own hands. There is tragedy in the knowledge that Bellatrix's rage was once rooted in love. The betrayal she felt when Andromeda left was not merely political, it was personal. Her sister had walked away, chosen light, chosen joy, chosen a life that did not include her. Bellatrix chose instead to become an instrument of darkness, but no one is born that way. She became what she did through pain, through pride, through a refusal to forgive. In the end, she didn't just lose her sister, she lost herself. Andromeda never returned to the black name. She never sought forgiveness or offered it. But when she whispered, "You're free," to her grandson, there was more than love in the words. There was defiance, the final break from a cursed legacy. Bellatrix Black will be remembered as a villain, but her story, if one dares to look closer, is a lament, a story of a girl who loved too hard and could not bear to lose, so she burned everything down, including her heart. Number 25. Bellatrix thought herself superior to other Death Eaters. Bellatrix Lestrange walked the halls of Malfoy Manor like a queen of ash, a monarch of ruin. Her long black dress hissed across the marble like a serpent, the hem whispering secrets that only madness could understand. Her chin was high, her steps sharp, and her very presence seemed to drain warmth from the walls. Death Eaters, men who had seen horrors, who had inflicted them, stepped aside without protest. She did not command them with rank, nor with spells, but with something more elemental, fear wrapped in devotion, cruelty wrapped in purpose. Her eyes, deep wells of obsession, glimmered with a shine that was not natural. She was not merely loyal to the Dark Lord, she was consumed by him. She carried herself with the elegance of someone who believed they were sacred, not because of blood alone, though her ties to the House of Black gave her the air of old nobility, but because she thought herself chosen. She believed in hierarchy, in worth earned through suffering and unshakable allegiance. Her contempt was never casual. It was not the cruel sneer of a spoiled aristocrat. It was the deliberate verdict of someone who weighed others and found them lacking. Her pride, as terrifying as it was, came from a code she never broke, and that made her all the more dangerous. Severus Snape, in particular, lived under her sharpened scrutiny. She did not simply dislike him, she distrusted everything he represented. To her, Snape was a man of masks, someone who never bled openly for the cause. "He lives in the shadow, not in the fire," she had once whispered, her voice trembling with something like hatred, or perhaps jealousy. Snape's cold, calculating manner was the opposite of Bellatrix's burning, explosive nature. Where she raged, he reasoned. Where she screamed oaths, he murmured secrets. And that, to Bellatrix, was betrayal. She did not understand quiet service. She only understood fire, sacrifice, and the ecstasy of complete surrender. Yet Bellatrix was not blind to true loyalty. She knew how to recognize those who had suffered and emerged darker, more resolute. Antonin Dolohov, silent and vicious, earned her rare nod of respect. He did not speak unless necessary. He did not parade his wounds, though he carried many from both physical punishment and years in Azkaban. When he returned, grey-faced and hollow-eyed, he walked beside her without fear, and she did not insult him. That silence, that mutual acknowledgment, was her highest form of praise. In a world where words were cheap and titles meaningless, pain was the currency of faith. Bartemius Crouch Jr. was another anomaly. She had seen him fall to the floor of the courtroom during their sentencing, bound and screaming, but she had also seen the fire in his eyes. Unlike the others, who begged or wept, Barty had burned. "The Dark Lord will rise again," Bellatrix had cried, and he had not flinched. Years later, when he emerged from the shadows of the Triwizard Tournament, cloaked in deception and fanatical purpose, she recognized him instantly as one of her own, not a follower, never that, a disciple, a prophet of vengeance. She scorned the weak, not for failure, but for doubt. Lucius Malfoy embodied everything Bellatrix despised. Polished and political, Lucius had once stood high in the Dark Lord's favor, but he had never bled for the cause. His devotion ended where his fear began. After the fiasco at the Department of Mysteries, where Harry Potter had escaped, where the prophecy was lost, Lucius fell not just in Voldemort's eyes, but in Bellatrix's. "You let the boy escape," she had snarled. To her, it was not just a tactical failure, it was heresy. He had defiled their mission with cowardice. Family, too, was no sanctuary. Bellatrix loved Narcissa, yes, but she did not trust her. Narcissa wept. Narcissa pleaded. Narcissa went to Snape, of all people, to protect her son. Bellatrix had followed her, half out of loyalty and half out of suspicion. In Spinner's End, she had watched with venomous disbelief as her sister begged for mercy from the man she considered a traitor. Family, in Bellatrix's world, was not above the cause. It was subordinate to it. Love without pain was weakness, and weakness could not be tolerated. Azkaban had not broken Bellatrix. It had refined her. While others went mad in chains, she had found clarity. She had chanted his name in the dark, not in despair, but in faith. "The Dark Lord will rise again," she had said, over and over, until the walls themselves trembled. Her loyalty was not sustained by hope, but by conviction. She saw herself as a martyr, a saint in a religion of shadow and flame. And when Voldemort did return, when the world scoffed and then trembled again, she rose not as a prisoner released, but as a priestess reborn. Even the monstrous had a place in her vision of purity. Fenrir Greyback, feral and vile, was not her companion, but he was tolerated. She detested his filth, his hunger for blood, but she did not insult his function. He terrorized children, he spread fear, and in that he served a higher purpose. Bellatrix was not sentimental. She valued usefulness above affection. She did not need to admire you to allow you at her side. She only needed to believe you were loyal. In the chaos of the Department of Mysteries, Bellatrix revealed her brutal form of camaraderie. She moved with Dolohov, with Rodolphus and Rabastan, not like a commander, but like a blade among other weapons. "Get the boy," she cried, and they moved without question. There was no hesitation, no clashing egos. In that moment, they were one mind, one hand, one war. She was not a general. She was not a queen. She was fury, and they knew it. Against her own blood, she was merciless. When she fought Tonks, she spat venom cloaked in laughter. "You're a disgrace to the family," she cried. But beneath the sneer was something deeper, betrayal. To Bellatrix, Andromeda's marriage to a Muggle-born was not just shame, it was desecration. Tonks's existence was a living insult to everything she believed sacred. She did not fight Tonks as a cousin, she fought her as a heretic. At Malfoy Manor, during the darkest stretch of the war, her madness sharpened into something pitiful. When she saw the sword of Gryffindor, her scream was not rage alone, it was terror. That it might have been stolen from her vault struck at something deeper than greed. Her vault, her place among the treasures of the Dark Lord, was sacred ground. The idea that it had been violated was an affront she could not endure. She turned on Hermione with a desperation so wild it stripped her of poise. "How did you get into my vault?" she shrieked, and in that moment she was not regal. She was afraid. Her final duel was her requiem. On the battlefield, amid ruin and fire, she faced Molly Weasley with a sneer, laughing even as spells flew. She mocked the mother's rage. She underestimated her fury. "You will never touch our children again," Molly had screamed, and Bellatrix laughed, just once. Then she died. Her arrogance, her pride, her belief in her own sanctity, shattered not with a blast of dark magic, but with a mother's wrath. Her life ended not in glory, but in irony. Her love for Voldemort was the flame that never dimmed. It was not romantic, not carnal. It was worship. She bowed before him not because she had to, but because she wanted to. "My lord," she would say, the words like a prayer. When others trembled in his presence, she burned brighter. When others feared his wrath, she craved his attention. He never gave her affection, not truly. He used her, but she never minded. His touch was not needed. His gaze was enough. She never saw herself as his equal. She was his instrument. Where others sought favor, she sought function, to punish, to torture, to kill in his name. This was her liturgy. Crucio was her hymn. Pain was her sermon. She did not ask questions, she imposed answers. Her arrogance, then, was not a delusion. It was a verdict earned through fire. Azkaban had not unmade her, it had crowned her. Her superiority was not about lineage, but about what she had endured. She had been beaten, mocked, imprisoned, and she had never broken. Those who cried for mercy, who betrayed, who doubted, they were beneath her, because she had walked through hell and emerged still singing the name of her master. There was in her a terrible consistency. She never wavered. She never begged. She never hid behind lies. Even as others, Draco, Lucius, even Snape, collapsed under the weight of consequences, Bellatrix stood tall. She laughed in the face of fire, and when she fell, she did not whimper. She smiled. Her last breath was defiance. She never wanted love. She believed it made people soft. She saw it in Narcissa's eyes, in Andromeda's betrayal, in Tonks's doomed romance. She rejected it with venom. She carved it out of herself. Her tree on the black family tapestry remained, burned and cracked, but intact. Bellatrix Lestrange never led armies. She was not a tactician. She was not a politician. She was a weapon, a relic of zealotry, a blade in human form. Voldemort pointed, and she cut. He spoke, and she obeyed. She needed no reward. His will was her doctrine. She believed in only one division, those who burned and those who merely smoked, those who lived with purpose and those who died in confusion. For the few who truly burned, Barty, Dolohov, even Greyback, she gave a nod. For the rest, she reserved her scorn. Her violence was not mindless, it was sacred, and though her body fell on the floor of the great hall, her madness shattered by a mother's love, her faith never died. Her greatest enemy was doubt, and it never touched her. That, more than anything, was why she walked taller than the rest. Not because she was mad, not because she was cruel, but because she believed. Number 26, she was incapable of mercy. Of all the followers Voldemort gathered beneath his serpent banner, none inspired dread like Bellatrix Lestrange. Her presence was not merely feared, it was a sign that death followed closely behind. In the Department of Mysteries, her laugh rang off the stone walls like a twisted lullaby to pain, sharp and gleeful. She tortured Alice and Frank Longbottom into madness, then mocked their son for his inherited pain. When Harry attempted the Cruciatus curse on her, she didn't flinch. Instead, She laughed and told him what the curse required. You need to really want to cause pain, to enjoy it. That line alone became a testament to her nature, cruelty not as a tool, but as a joy. Yet amid the carnage she so often left behind, there were fractures, tiny, glimmering cracks in the black armor. And it was within these rare, flickering moments that Bellatrix's humanity, however corrupted, revealed itself. Her devotion to Voldemort seemed bottomless. It went beyond allegiance and into the realm of worship. In The Half-Blood Prince, she knelt before him, her voice trembling with reverence, calling his very presence an honor. To others, this was madness, but to Bellatrix it was faith. Voldemort had become her god, her cause, her salvation. And yet gods do not weep for their disciples. When she was sentenced to Azkaban, Voldemort abandoned her. Still she believed. She endured the Dementors, clinging to that belief like a sacred relic. Sirius Black once remarked that she came out sane only because she had been mad to begin with. Perhaps he was wrong. Perhaps her sanity was never the question. Perhaps it was her belief that kept her mind intact, an unshakable purpose, a loyalty that anchored her through the screaming silence of Azkaban's dark corridors. But not all her loyalties were to Voldemort. There was another bond, far older, rooted not in ideology but in blood. Her sister Narcissa, pale and proud, represented the last vestige of Bellatrix's identity before Voldemort consumed her. When Narcissa asked her to accompany her to Spinner's End, Bellatrix went, not willingly, not joyfully. She sneered, growled, mocked the very idea, but she followed. "She has made me come," she snarled, a beast tugged on a leash. Yet she stayed. In Snape's home, it was Bellatrix who demanded answers, who questioned his loyalty with a fire that was not only suspicion, but fear. It was fear for Draco. Bellatrix never said the words out loud, never admitted concern or affection. But she challenged Snape because she wanted to know he would protect her sister's son. When Narcissa proposed the unbreakable vow, Bellatrix's eyes darkened, not because she wished harm upon Draco, but because she saw the implication. If Snape failed, Draco would die. If Snape succeeded, he would take Draco's place in damnation. Bellatrix hovered in that moment, conflicted and tense. Her silence, her scowls, her sharp tongue. These were not just the weapons of a Death Eater, they were the armor of a sister who couldn't afford to be soft. Behind her derision was dread. Later, when the trio was captured and brought to Malfoy Manor, Bellatrix's fury knew no limit. When she discovered the sword of Gryffindor, supposedly stolen from her vault at Gringotts, her rage snapped into brutality. She tortured Hermione with the Cruciatus Curse, screaming about the vault, demanding answers through the girl's screams. But before she acted, she turned to Draco. She gave him a task. Move the prisoners. If you haven't got the guts to finish them, leave them to me. It was a taunt, but it was also a barrier. She didn't demand that he kill. She didn't force his hand. For a woman who delighted in cruelty, her restraint in that moment was deafening. She drew the line for him, because she had already crossed it, and she knew there was no coming back. In that same house, velvet and darkness wrapped around despair like ivy, Bellatrix moved like a storm. She was quick to anger, quicker to violence, but her eyes lingered on Draco longer than they needed to. Her threats, loud and performative, never touched him. Her cruelty extended to others, but not to him. And when Narcissa looked at her in panic, there was something in Bellatrix's gaze that wasn't rage. It was calculation, fear, perhaps even guilt. She knew what Voldemort was capable of. She had lived under that gaze. She had endured his punishments, his dismissals, his cold disdain. She didn't want Draco to know that world, at least not yet. When the Battle of Hogwarts erupted into chaos, Bellatrix was among the fiercest. Her duels were dances of destruction, her spells slicing through the air with theatrical delight. But she wasn't reckless. She moved with a purpose. Her eyes constantly sought targets. She looked for Harry, yes, but also for Draco. She wasn't merely a servant of the Dark Lord. She was a general with a hidden priority: keep the heir alive, keep the bloodline pure, not because of principle, but because family, for all its flaws, was the only thing Bellatrix had left that tethered her to the world. There is an almost mythic quality to her final duel. When Molly Weasley screamed across the battlefield and challenged her, it was not a moment of honor, it was desperation. Bellatrix had aimed to kill Ginny, not because it was strategic, but because it was personal. Ginny had stood tall in the face of fear. She reminded Bellatrix of something, perhaps herself, once long ago, or perhaps Narcissa, or Andromeda, the sister she had cast out. Ginny was love, loyalty, and defiance, all things Bellatrix had twisted or abandoned. She tried to snuff it out with a single spell, and in return she met the rage of a mother. Molly Weasley, the woman Bellatrix had mocked as weak, struck with the power of love unbroken. The final spell didn't just kill Bellatrix, it ended her delusion. She didn't die with a scream. She died laughing, still clinging to the role she had carved for herself. But beneath that laugh, there may have been something else, a recognition. A moment where she saw that real strength had nothing to do with power. That love, though she had mangled it, was not weakness, it was invincible. Bellatrix's love had always been distorted. Her worship of Voldemort was not love in the way we understand it, it was obsession. She spoke of him with reverence, yes, but also with longing. She had no children, but some say she might have wished for them, perhaps not out of maternal desire, but out of a need to anchor her madness in blood. She spoke of purity, but her actions destroyed every sacred thing. And yet, in her desperation to please Voldemort, there was always a thread of fear, not for herself, but for what he could do to the ones she left behind. Her vault in Gringotts was more than a treasure trove, it was a shrine. The cursed goblets and enchanted artifacts were not just symbols of wealth, they were remnants of a family that had once stood proud and untouched. When Harry and his friends broke in, Bellatrix's panic was immediate. "Did anyone take anything?" she screamed, her voice cracking. It wasn't about the goblet, it was about legacy, history, control. Everything was unraveling, and she felt it. She had lived a life defined by control. Her wand was precise, her curses lethal, her will unbreakable. But in that final year, she was losing it. Draco was slipping, Narcissa was growing distant, Voldemort's trust was waning, and the world was shifting under her feet. The vault was sacred because it was unchanging, and when even that was violated, her mind frayed further. Still, she didn't turn on Draco. Even as Voldemort's suspicion thickened like smoke, Bellatrix stood between them. Not physically, never openly, but she redirected Voldemort's anger, offered new targets, conjured new fears to keep his attention away from her sister's son. And when Draco failed to kill Dumbledore, Bellatrix didn't celebrate. She didn't shame him. She disappeared into silence, because she knew what failure would cost, and because, in her own poisonous way, she cared. When Voldemort took over Malfoy Manor, it became a tomb. Bellatrix moved through its halls like a ghost, her laughter sharper, her eyes wilder. But her heart, or what remained of it, beat louder when Draco entered the room. She demanded more from him, but she never punished him. That distinction is important. Others were tortured for less. Yet Draco remained untouched, and that was no accident. Even when she interrogated the goblin about the vault, her panic was not about punishment, it was about consequence. She understood Voldemort's wrath better than anyone. She had felt it, and she knew that if he suspected betrayal, even suspicion alone, Draco would not be spared. So she screamed and threatened and clawed at the truth, not to avenge herself, but to protect the boy. Bellatrix Lestrange was a creature of violence, yes, but she was also a creature of survival, and survival for her had never been about hiding, It had been about fighting, clawing, cursing, and burning her way through a world that threatened to change without her. In that world, love had no place, but instinct did. An instinct told her that Draco must live, not because he was good, not because he was strong, but because he was family. When she duelled at Hogwarts, it wasn't for the Dark Lord anymore. It was for the illusion that her life had meant something, that all she had sacrificed, her youth, her freedom, her sisters, had not been for nothing. She died with her wand raised high, not protecting Voldemort, but attacking the future. Ginny was the next generation, Molly was its guardian, and Bellatrix, the relic of another era, was struck down not just by a mother's love, but by history itself. Even her death left no redemption, no final act of heroism, but within her ruin were pieces, sharp, jagged pieces of something human, a love that rotted, a loyalty that blinded, and a heart that in the end still beat for the wrong reasons, but beat nonetheless. Number 27, Bellatrix believed she was above the law. Bellatrix Lestrange did not sit in the courtroom with the air of someone pleading for forgiveness or shielding herself from justice. She sat with her chin high, her hair wild around her shoulders, her eyes wide and unblinking, as if feeding on the tension in the room. Her laughter, sharp and slicing, came not from arrogance, but from something far deeper and more terrifying. She laughed because she had already weighed the cost of her actions and accepted them. Torturing Frank and Alice Longbottom into madness wasn't an act of rage. It was a sacrifice offered at the altar of her beliefs. And when Bartemius Crouch demanded accountability, she met his fury with a prophecy cloaked as defiance. "The Dark Lord will rise again, Crouch. Throw us into Azkaban, we will wait." Her trial wasn't a fall from grace. It was her coronation as Voldemort's most devoted. Bellatrix never denied what she had done. Unlike the cowardly among Voldemort's followers who cried out imperious, when the war was lost, she stood by her crimes as if they were medals of honor. She never whispered excuses, she never begged for leniency, she never looked for escape routes or forged alibis. In the final years of the First Wizarding War, when the Ministry promised swift punishment for Death Eaters, Bellatrix leaned into the fire. She didn't try to run. She embraced the hunt. Every arrest warrant, every headline, every whisper in the corridors of the Aura office, she considered it all part of her offering. Her faith wasn't passive, it was violent and unrelenting. Raised in the House of Black, she was not the product of an ordinary pure-blood upbringing. Her parents, Cygnus and Druella, imbued her with more than pride. They poured into her veins the poison of superiority, the gospel of purity. Her cousin Sirius was the disgrace, the defector, the traitor who dared to value Muggle-borns. To Bellatrix, his rejection of their bloodline wasn't just personal, it was spiritual blasphemy, but her loyalty to blood wasn't about arrogance, it was about destiny. When she met Tom Riddle, she recognized him not as a political figure or charismatic rebel, but as something nearly divine. The laws of the Ministry, in her eyes, were the desperate scaffolding of a broken world built by the impure. When the doors of Azkaban slammed shut behind her, Bellatrix did not shiver. Most prisoners lost their identities to the Dementors, their memories of happiness eaten away until they became husks, but not her. She was kept alive by a singular blazing conviction. "The Dark Lord will return," she would murmur, curled in the cold darkness. "He will reward the faithful." And he did. The mass breakout in January of 1996 was no coincidence. It was a ritual fulfilled. She emerged from Azkaban thinner, paler, her voice more rasping, but her mind was sharpened to a point. That escape wasn't survival, it was resurrection. Bellatrix had never held illusions about the Ministry. She knew its internal rot, the backroom deals, the fear-driven decisions, the whispered compromises. She understood the law, she simply rejected its authority. When she fought auras, she didn't view them as righteous defenders, she saw them as puppets, Every spell she hurled in the Department of Mysteries was calculated, brutal. Sirius Black died not because she slipped or stumbled, but because she struck true. Her spell didn't merely kill, it severed ties. She stared at the veil after it swallowed him with something like reverence. She had eliminated a defiler of blood. She had done her duty. The confrontation with the young fighters, Harry, Hermione, Neville, and the rest, was not a panicked skirmish, it was a purge. When she faced Ginny, Luna, and Hermione, her face twisted not with confusion, but with certainty. "You dare fight me!" she spat, her curses exploding in vicious arcs. Her words were not insults, they were declarations of hierarchy. She saw them not as rebels, but as anomalies that needed correction. And when Harry attempted the Cruciatus Curse, she didn't flinch. Instead, she delivered the cold truth. You need to mean them, Potter. You need to really want to cause pain, to enjoy it. That was her gospel. Pain, loyalty, and belief were not only valid, but sacred. Even when confronted by Albus Dumbledore, a figure most feared, respected, and revered, Bellatrix did not show fear. She didn't cower behind Voldemort. She stood her ground. She believed Dumbledore's reliance on rules, on compassion, on mercy, made him weak. In her world, those who hesitated were already lost. She followed a law of domination, of blood and fire, of unquestioning submission to the only power she recognized as eternal. Her disdain for her own blood relatives was rooted not in cruelty, but in judgment. Narcissa, who worried for her son, Lucius, who failed at the ministry and lost the prophecy, both were disappointments. Her loyalty was fanatical, but it had structure. Snape, ever enigmatic, was the object of her deepest suspicions. When he joined the inner circle, Bellatrix did not cheer. She observed, she questioned, because she knew betrayal didn't arrive in dramatic fashion. It wore polite masks and spoke calmly. She trusted no one whose loyalty wavered for even a breath. The killing of Dobby at Shell Cottage revealed Bellatrix's version of justice. It was swift, furious, and ceremonial. A house elf aiding enemies of the Dark Lord had no right to exist. "You dare take a wand from a witch?" she shrieked. The moment wasn't madness, it was jurisprudence in her world. It was the application of Voldemort's law. Any deviation from the natural order, as she saw it, had to be punished, immediately and absolutely. The torture of Hermione in Malfoy Manor was more than sadism. It was an interrogation wrapped in holy fervor. She needed answers. Where did they get the sword of Gryffindor? Was it the real one? She carved into Hermione not out of bloodlust, but out of fear that Voldemort's enemies had touched his sacred objects. Her violence was a liturgy. Every scream a verse, every question a confession demanded by her twisted doctrine. When the ministry fell and Voldemort took control, Bellatrix did not vanish into shadows. She stepped forward. She sat at the head of the new order, issuing judgments, overseeing torture, sentencing Muggle-borns. Her new law wasn't hidden. It had a courtroom. It had documents. It had trials. She was no longer a criminal. She had become judge, jury, and executioner, and she executed with the pride of a priestess, cleansing her altar. Her duel with Molly Weasley during the Battle of Hogwarts was not just an accident of war. It was fate dragging both women to a final reckoning. Bellatrix laughed when Ginny nearly died, her wand glowing with death. She didn't see Molly as a threat. She saw her as a mother whose love would inevitably make her weak. But she was wrong. Molly's spell tore through the air like a mother's scream turned to fire. When it struck, Bellatrix didn't beg. She didn't run. Her last breath wasn't surprise, it was rage, unfinished and raw. Even in death, Bellatrix Lestrange did not fall as a coward. She died with her wand raised, her mouth open in fury. Her body fell, but her expression did not change. She had not imagined survival. She had never intended to live beyond Voldemort's rule. Her life was a lit candle on the altar of destruction, and it had burned until it ran out. She had never tried to hide her identity. She never erased the dark mark. She never changed her surname. She walked the world as Bellatrix Lestrange, Death Eater, loyalist, disciple. Her crimes were on display, not concealed. Her soul was laid bare and painted in blood. To her, every cut she made, every curse she cast, was part of a divine mission. She once told Narcissa, "The Dark Lord will reward us beyond all imagining." This was not empty rhetoric. It was a creed, a prophecy, and for a time she lived it. Voldemort raised her up, trusted her, cherished her fanaticism. In a world of spies and cowards, Bellatrix was his constant, his sharpened blade, his echo. The world remembers villains by their excuses, by the ways they slither out of their own stories. But Bellatrix carved hers in stone. She never ducked behind circumstance. She wanted the world to see her, to hear her name, and tremble, not because she desired fame, but because she believed it proved her righteousness. The law could not punish her. The law did not matter. Even within the dark, tangled network of Voldemort's followers, Bellatrix stood alone. Lucius lost his nerve. Draco collapsed. Snape wore 2 masks. But Bellatrix had only one face, and she showed it to the world with no shame. Her Lord's will was her scripture. When he hurt her, she smiled. When he praised her, she glowed. No court, no aura, no decree could match the strength of that worship. What many mistook for insanity was not madness at all. It was faith. The law changes, governments rise and fall, ministers come and go. But to Bellatrix, Voldemort's vision was eternal. She didn't break the law. She replaced it with fire, with purity, with a belief so absolute that it consumed everything else. She was not above the law. She had annihilated it and built something far more dangerous in its place. Number 28. She didn't care about money. Bellatrix Lestrange sat high among the ruins of a world she believed belonged to her. Her spine straight as a dagger, her eyes wild yet proud. She carried herself with the bearing of a queen, even when imprisoned, even when broken. She had been raised to believe in the supremacy of blood, of names that echoed through centuries, and of fortunes too ancient to be counted. Gold, for Bellatrix, was never mere currency. It was ritual. It was proof that she came from something greater, something eternal. She had no need for trinkets or luxuries for their own sake, but she needed what they represented: control, class, and the divine right to dominate. Born Bellatrix Black, she was the eldest daughter of Cygnus and Druella Black, and from her first breath she was told who she was. Her family, the Blacks, were one of the sacred 28, the noble houses of pure-blood wizarding Britain. They flaunted their genealogy as kings once flaunted their crowns. Toujours pure, their motto declared, always pure. Bellatrix believed this not merely with arrogance, but with religious fervor. And, like all devout believers, she demanded symbols to uphold her faith. Her Gringotts vault, her family heirlooms, the Lestrange name, they were her sacred texts. When she married Rodolphus Lestrange, it was no more a love match than a royal wedding in ancient Europe. It was arranged, inevitable, correct. The Lestranges were as pure as the Blacks, and their fortune, though perhaps not as immense, was respected, intact, and dark. The union was a contract, an alliance, a preservation of something sacred. She bore no children, but this too was not a failing in her eyes. Her true offspring was ideology. Her vault at Gringotts, deep within the earth, guarded not only by goblin enchantments, but by the weight of history, was her womb. It held the proof of her station. Not all wealth jingled, some whispered. The cup of Helga Hufflepuff rested in that vault, not just because Voldemort trusted Bellatrix, but because he knew what that vault meant to her. It was inviolable, sacred. She would die before allowing any soul to defile it. Voldemort saw in Bellatrix not only a servant, but a shrine-keeper. She would worship his darkness with unflinching loyalty, and she would protect what was his as fiercely as what was hers. For Bellatrix, the difference between the two blurred. The Horcrux was Voldemort's fragment, but it rested in her shrine. Its desecration would be her own. When Griphook later tells Harry, she was beside herself, frantically interrogating everyone. He is not exaggerating. In the moments after discovering that her vault may have been breached, Bellatrix Lestrange comes undone, not with Voldemort's rage, but with her own brand of horror. This is not about a mission. It is not about war. It is about trespass. To her, the vault represented the sanctity of bloodline and heritage, and someone had spat upon it. Someone had dared to touch what was reserved only for the worthy. The panic was not strategic. It was primal. She interrogated Griphook with wide, haunted eyes. Her voice, usually sharp and mocking, shook with disbelief. If there has been a breach, if the vault has been entered, that is a very serious matter indeed. It was the closest thing to a confession she ever made, a crack in the porcelain, a revelation that beneath all her madness lived a creature ruled by fear, fear of being stripped of her untouchable status. She had faced Azkaban without flinching, had mocked death, had killed without mercy, but the idea that someone had laid hands on her heirlooms left her shaking. She tortured Hermione Granger not out of allegiance to Voldemort, but because Hermione had impersonated her, had walked in her skin, had stepped into Gringotts in her name. "What else did you take? What else?" she shrieked, as blood streaked down Hermione's arms. The anger was not calculated, it was personal. Hermione had not merely stolen, she had desecrated. She had worn Bellatrix's face, mimicked her voice, and entered the temple of her identity. That crime to Bellatrix was worse than murder. It was sacrilege. Unlike Lucius Malfoy, who flaunted his wealth as a politician might flash a badge, Bellatrix wore hers like a relic. She did not live for the trappings of money, but for what those trappings signified. Her dresses were not fashionable, they were ceremonial, black as mourning cloth, stitched with dark enchantments, lined with her family's pride. Her vault held not just gold, but secrets, talismans, bone and silver, cursed jewels passed from ancestor to ancestor. Each item a testament to her worth. Her lineage was her currency. Sirius Black, her cousin, and the family disgrace, once mocked the Blacks' obsession with purity. "The House of Black is the noblest and most ancient," he said, dripping with sarcasm. But Bellatrix did not laugh. She believed it, more deeply than any other. Sirius ran from their legacy. Bellatrix embraced it. He joined the Order of the Phoenix. She carved the dark mark into her arm and descended into darkness, not because she had no choice, but because to her that path was holy. Dumbledore, in his humble robes and candy-coloured socks, was everything Bellatrix despised. He represented a world in which merit outweighed ancestry, in which love triumphed over power. She saw such humility not as strength, but as betrayal. Her world demanded grandeur, reverence, and the visible weight of inheritance. In contrast, Molly Weasley, with her patched robes and cluttered kitchen, was invisible to Bellatrix until the very end. During the final duel at Hogwarts, Bellatrix faced Molly with a sneer. "What will happen to your children when I've killed you?" she taunted. In that moment, Bellatrix was not a soldier. She was a predator reclaiming what she believed was hers, dominance. Yet she fell not to bloodline or magic beyond her comprehension, but to something she never understood: love. The same love that protected Harry from Voldemort shattered Bellatrix, not because it was stronger, but because she had never counted it as power. She laughed as she died, as she had laughed through pain and madness, but behind that laughter was desperation. Her legacy was falling apart. The vault had been emptied, the treasures violated, her name now mingled with shame. Even among Death Eaters, her madness had become a liability. Voldemort trusted her, yes, but not with leadership. He did not give her armies. He gave her fragments, broken pieces locked away. Even he knew she could not be entrusted with the world, only with a tomb. In the ruins of Gringotts, as the dragon tore through the underground, the image of Bellatrix's vault shattered with it. The golden mountains, the enchanted duplications, the dark artifacts, gone or rendered meaningless. Her shrine had been raided by the very people she loathed. They had touched her treasures. They had seen them. The illusion of untouchability was gone. That was her true downfall, not Harry, not Voldemort's death, but that her sanctum had been made public. The myth that Bellatrix transcended materialism is born of a misreading. True, she did not flaunt wealth like the Malfoys. She did not bathe in vanity like Gilderoy Lockhart or stack vaults like goblins. But that's because her relationship with wealth was never material, it was spiritual. She didn't want things, she wanted symbols. She wanted the world to look at her and see not a woman, not even a witch, but a continuation of something ancient, something untouchable. The vault was her cathedral. Even her wand, 12 3/4 inches, walnut, dragon heartstring, was a reflection of her nature, unyielding, dark, elegant. It was not just a weapon, it was a scepter. And when she wielded it, it wasn't only spells she cast, but judgment. Every curse, every scream, every hissed insult came from a place of superiority. Her victims were not opponents, they were defilers. Bellatrix Lestrange did not want to remake the world, she wanted to restore it. Her madness was not chaos, it was doctrine. In her mind, Voldemort was not a tyrant but a messiah. His rise meant the resurrection of the old order, the return of the sacred families to power, the purging of the impure. She was willing to kill, to die, even to be imprisoned, but not to be humiliated, not to be touched, not to be robbed. Her fury at Gringotts, her screams, her trembling hands. It was not merely the fear of punishment, it was the mourning of desecration. She had lost more than gold that day. She had lost the myth, the belief that she, unlike others, was immune, that her birthright made her invincible, that her vault would remain sealed forever. And so Bellatrix died not just in battle, but in betrayal. Betrayed by a world that refused to remember the old rules, betrayed by blood that no longer bought respect, betrayed by vaults that no longer kept secrets. She perished in a new world, one where courage, not name, carved destiny, where love, not legacy, drew the line between good and evil. The madness that gripped her was not born in Azkaban. It was born the moment she realized that gold and blood were no longer enough, that her identity, her worth, her sanctum could be entered, touched, and destroyed by those she considered beneath her. That is what drove Bellatrix Lestrange to scream, not fear, not Voldemort, but loss of illusion, loss of sacredness, and for a woman who had built her entire existence on being sacred, there was no recovery from that, only laughter and death.